Hi, and welcome to another edition of Wildside Live. I'm Chip Leer, and we are very fortunate today to be sitting down with our latest National Walleye Tour champion, Korey Sprengel. How you doing, Korey?
Good. How are you doing, Chip?
Doing fabulous. I'm gonna run for listeners, viewers. If you're not aware of Korey Sprengel, which if you follow any walleye at all, you definitely know who Korey Sprengel is. But let me just give you some stats. These our friend John Bala dug up for us here today, so we would have something here. But we fished 29 National Walleye Tour events. Of those 29 events, Korey Sprengel has won 5 of them. He has cashed 19 checks inside the top 10 for Angler of the Year every year since we started the tournaments in 2013 as Angler of the Year average finish. So over an entire season, we rank the anglers. His average finish is 5th in that time. Average finish of every single event, 21st. I think the next person in line is Chris Gilman with an average finish of 29. Korey's got 9 top 10s, 18 top 20s, total winnings on National Walleye Tour alone of $447,000. That's without Angler Advantage, which is a side pot, which I'm assuming you participate in this side pot. Yeah. The next closest angler is John Hoyer at 242,300 plus. Now, John's only been fishing a couple of years, so he's coming on strong. And our Wildside Live here today, my objective is, Korey, is to talk to Korey about obviously his latest win here in the Bay of Green Bay out of Oconto. Pick that bite apart, pick apart the Great Lakes, and how you go about deciphering where, when, and how to fish, and we can see what we can learn from it, because you're obviously doing a whole lot of things right now when it comes to the world of walleye fishing. Your day one weight, to recap where we're at there, day one weight 42.13, average of 8.24 pounds for your 5 fish limit. Day 2 was 35.35, put you at about 707 average total weight for the 2 days, 77.48, an average of 7.74 pounds. In the event, just so everybody understands, there were 630 fish caught. Of the 630 fish weighed on our National Walleye Tour scale, the average weight was 4.66. So, Korey, you're much obviously higher than that and topped an incredibly talented field of 121 pros and 121 co-anglers, and led us all the way to the largest margin of victory in our National Walleye Tour history, with 17.17 pounds over the second place, which is a young up-and-comer, Isaac Lackish, who weighed 60.31. He averages 6.03 pounds of fish. Very good angler in his right, but right on his heels, Ryan Dempsey. He knows what he's doing on that bay. I mean, Ryan's a veteran. He gets it done. Brandon Ruffalo was our 4th place finisher with 54.01, another rookie. So it's really neat to see 2 rookies inside the top 5 here, because 5th place was rounded out with Jacob L., 5.36 pound average. But what an event. And the first thing I want to know is, when you came into that event, were you at all concerned that people had forgot about Korey Sprengel? I mean, we're coming off John Hoyer's year, and Korey, was there any motivation all winter long to go, you know what, I want one of those trophies again?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's crazy. Through the winter, I got some messages and, on Facebook or social media, kind of saying, sorry about your rough year last year. I hope this year's a better year. And I'm thinking, like, I won a bass tournament. I was going into Angler of the Year all the way until the last day with a shot. And, but apparently that's a bad year for me, I guess. I mean, I was happy. But
was it fourth for Angler of the Year, right?
yeah, I think I was 4th.
Yeah.
And so, like, I thought that was good. I mean, that's what I shoot for every year, is a top 10 Angler of the Year. It doesn't matter if I didn't have a top 10 or not. It's just that consistency to me is I shoot to be in that top 10 every year, and that's just kind of my goal. And I know one of these years it's coming where it's not going to happen, but that's just one of my goals every year.
Well, it's great to have the objective, like, you know, you want to be consistent, but consistency on a tour that is made up of 4 events a season, multiple days at each stop, different bodies of water at each stop. And what most people may not think about, I mean, there's a core of touring pros doing all the events, but you got every hot stick in the region jumping into their favorite body of water. And you gotta think differently than they do and prevail and do, I mean, your average finish in 20s, you're making a lot of the right decisions. So when you make your decisions, how do you decide, like when you get to a body of water? I mean, I think first and foremost, and I do have a series of questions here for you, and I've got some great questions input from our social media pages where people have reached out and they want to ask you questions. But how do you break down a body of water, especially somewhere you've never been before? Because a lot of these bodies of water are so big, they're really intimidating.
Yeah, for sure. One of the first things, it doesn't matter if it's a body of water I've been to a bunch or I fish all the time, like Green Bay here. One of the first things I want to do in practice is just go to an area I know I'm going to catch fish. And if it's a community spot, if it's small fish, whatever it is, the first thing I want to do is get my confidence up and really maybe start fine tuning some colors. Like, maybe it's purples are working or whatever it may be, but I want to get some bites. The worst thing you want to do is roll into a location you've never been to and go 3 or 4 days without having much, because then you start panicking. I always want to go into a practice catching some fish right away to give me some confidence that I can get bit if I have to. If worst case scenario practice doesn't go the way I want it to for big fish, I know I can go somewhere and catch fish. And so that's what I always want to start out with, is a spot like that for sure.
So when in Rome, do as the Romans. I mean, it's okay to go to the community hole. You don't have to recreate the wheel.
Exactly. Like I said, I mean, you have to have confidence. Fishing is all about confidence to me. I mean, what works in my boat may not work in someone else's boat, but whatever you're accustomed to or confident with, you got to roll with some confidence. So that way, when you start getting away from what you may think might work and you're trying some new things, that in the back of your mind, you may have the right colors or the right baits, or something figured out for that matter, even if it's a depth, that you might be doing the right thing.
So you made a statement here after this last event, which is your 5th win on the National Walleye Tour, that your win here mimicked a lot of the conditions you had at our first Sturgeon Bay event. What do you mean by that? And the first time, this first Sturgeon Bay event was the National Walleye Tour's first time to Green Bay.
Yeah, so 2013 out of Sturgeon Bay there, that tournament was pretty much the same weekend that we had here in July. It was a slugfest on day one. I mean, there was things happening. The water was warm. It was a warm, I guess, whole summer it must have been, because I remember the water temperatures being crazy high and warm. And, everyone caught them on day one, but day two, I remember it being 42 degrees that morning. We had some storms that went through midday on day one. I was in by like 11 o'clock, so I had beat those storms, but they were really bad ones. And we had a huge north blow. And what that did is literally the water temperatures, I believe, were like 11, 12 degrees colder in my starting area when I got there the next morning. I did pull off one fish, but the north current was just racing. And what that's bringing is that 100 and plus feet of water, all that water through the islands from Lake Michigan. You start getting this huge influx of cold, clear water, and it's a shock to those fish. I mean, it's the middle of summer. They want 70-degree water, not 50-degree water. And so what I had to do in that tournament was the same thing I had to adjust basically in this event, is I had to find where there was some warm water left. It may have only been, I think in that particular tournament, it was probably about a 200-yard stretch or so, a little eddy in the current that still had warm water sitting in it. And those fish there hadn't really been affected too much. The water temperature dropped a little bit, but it wasn't like everything around it. And they were kind of hiding out of the current. Same thing for this event. Honestly, didn't pre-fish the day before the tournament, or I pre-fished on Tuesday, but Monday I didn't either. I seen the forecast, and I really knew that anything I was about to learn and practice was going to be completely erased. and I was going to have to use experience and just trusting myself that it was going to take time. I was just going to have to go out there and really start looking on and looking for water temperatures and kind of getting a baseline of what the what the core temperatures had cooled down to. Uh, I'd say 2 miles from where I was fishing on day one, it was 57 degrees. The area I was fishing, one side of it was like 65, 66, and the fish that I ended up catching were in like 69, 70. And I just kept honing in and kind of getting a feel for where the warmer stuff was and where the cooler temperatures were that morning. So when I started to really get my lines wet and focus on an area, I knew roughly, where that warmer water pocket was. Then I just try to, get a piece of structure, or if it's in this particular tournament, it was a set of boulders that all those fish were huddled around. It was relatively shallow. The warm water was shallow. It didn't go down very far. And it's just one of those things where I had to do it 2 days in a row here versus just the one day in Sturgeon Bay, the 2013 year.
So run me through the program. We're going to come back to how you got to this program, but run me through the program that you utilized at this NWT to bolt the right fish.
It was, trolling planer boards, offshore planer boards with tattle flags. The fish on day one, surprisingly, were hitting really hard. Mid-morning to, afternoon. I came in at 12:20 both days. But so I'm using a 1/2 ounce inline weight to get those baits down there. And that depends, on the depth of water. I was fishing 20 feet or less this whole tournament. And so 1/2 ounce is just fine. I'll go up to an ounce. But I like to use the lightest weights possible because it allows me to change those depths. If I get in shallower, I simply speed up a little bit, and that light weight, I can raise those baits up with just the resistance of the blades and the crawler harness. And so, I was using crawler harness, lead lengths might have been 5 feet or so. I run a shorter trolling rod than probably almost everyone on circuit. I've been doing it for about 10 years. I only run a 7-foot trolling rod. It's actually an HMG Fenwick. It's a casting rod. It's not even a trolling rod. I like short rods because I feel I have more control and they're easier to use. And with that short trolling rod, I can stand closer to the side of the boat. So when it comes to netting the fish, I can see what's going on. I don't need to back up. Actually, it's kind of funny. My coingler on day 2 kept backing up, and I'm like, Chris, stay close to the edge. I'm like, I want you to see what's going on, so when the lift is, when that fish is turning, where it is compared to the net. And with those short rods, you can literally stand over the side of the boat. It makes it easier and faster for getting planer boards on and off. And it's just one of those things. As long as you balance the rod action, with the shorter rod that you're using, as long as you balance that rod action where it's limber enough at the tip but have some backbone, you can do just as much with a shorter rod. The only downfall is they're not as high when they're in the rod holder. So I use rod holder extensions to get those rods propped up so those lines aren't dragging in front of each other. But getting back to the bait, it's a simple crawler harness with either a Colorado blade or a willow blade. It kind of depends on water clarity and I guess at times water temperature. The willow blades spin faster and tighter, and if there's a lot of current, I'll generally go to willows because they have less resistance. I can cut through that current a little bit better. Now those Colorado blades, spin wider, have a bigger thump. Day 2, especially the water was quite a bit dirtier than it was on day 1. Day 1, you could probably see down like 10, 12 feet or so because it was colder and clearer. On day 2, when I had got there, that's when I had made the comment that I almost knew I had won already. Before I even wet a line, I looked down in the water. The water temperature was 71 degrees, and it was green and warm. I mean, there was algae particles floating in the water, and it was dark. You can maybe see 5 to 6 feet or so. And so I'm not sure where that warm water came from, but it definitely doubled back up to the area I was fishing, and I knew it was going to be on. And with the crawler harness setups I like to use in open water, I always use an octopus hook with a treble hook. Anytime I can get away with using a treble hook, I do. Because if you can hook them with a treble hook, 9 times out of 10, they're not coming off. And I use the Fusion 19 octopus hooks, either number 1 or number 2 on the front, then a number 8 or number 10 treble hook on the back, depending on the size of the fish that I'm catching, or sometimes even the crawlers. I mean, a lot of times I like to try using a number 10. Obviously, the lighter weight, it's less effective, allows that crawler to have the fluid action in the back. But there's times if you're dealing with big fish on like Erie or even these fish that I'll go to that number 8.
So was there a speed difference from day
So
one to day two? And I mean, obviously it's gonna be dictated by bites, or how do you determine that?
it's not really dictated by bites at all, and so speed to me doesn't mean a lot. I don't have I have a baseline, like it's like anything like 1 to 1.2 is probably where I want in a stagnant environment. That's where I'm gonna want to troll a crawler harness speed wise. But the Great Lakes, Green Bay especially, the speed really doesn't matter because I'm either trying to dictate where my crawler harnesses are in the water to either raise those baits up, so I'm using more speed, or slow down to get them deeper. But on day one of the tournament, the current was just racing out of the north. And so I was trolling from north to south, and I was going 1.6 to 2 miles an hour. And I was going that fast just because if I went 1 mile an hour, 1.2, literally my baits were probably moving at like 0.4, because there was that much water heading south. And so I had to pick my speed up to get my crawlers or my crawler harnesses spinning. And obviously, then if I wanted to go faster to get them a little bit shallower over the structure, I was going 2 miles an hour easy. And so it was one of those things. I really made obviously that adjustment. And that was one of the parts to the program that I had to figure out when I got up there is what the current was doing, and every spot is different. One of the basically where I was starting my pass was in like 70, 80 feet of water, and it came up this big break and into like 25 to 15 feet of water generally. And so you're compressing all that deep water that is moving over top of this sandbar and this structure. And so it's making it go really fast. And there's a lot of current. And those fish are using that current as just like they do in a river system to allow the bait to be washed right to them. So these fish are actually hiding on the back of a little sandbar and a little current eddy, which was holding that warmer water up in that shallow area. They're just getting, any of the structure that was off behind or out in the open in this high current was just basically being washed into all that cold water. And you can see that on your Lowrance electronics very easily. You see all those thermoclines and that rolling basically clutter on your screen as the currents mixing together, that warm and cool water. And those fish just do not like that at all. And they want that stable, warm temperature. Obviously, they're easy to catch in that. A lot of days when it mixes up like that, they'll take a day or two off easy and to readjust those temperatures. But it was really a hard troll, and I honestly can say that I probably never trolled through where I caught these fish. I actually knew that boulder pile was there from smallmouth fishing. And that's one thing about this bay. I mean, I think I have probably 4,000 waypoints in my graph, just logging, rocks. I mean, Chip, it's smallmouth fishing. I mean, it could be that one rock could mean, catching 10 bites very easily. And so I like to know where everything is. And it came into my hands at this event. I knew there was a boulder pile there that came up to, it was 5 feet. I'm not sure if that was 5 feet 2 or 3 years ago or when it was. It may be 7 or 8 there now. I actually never went over with my boat, but I knew it was there, and those fish are all around that. And it was a 100-yard stretch, and it was a lot of boat control to get in there because I had to basically come around this sandbar and hook in the backside, and I'm using a lot of speed to get in where I need to be. And once I got into my boat into that shallower water where I needed to be, I had to turn it again so I didn't just go straight up into 5 feet of water. And so this whole time I'm turning, I'm obviously changing the speed of my inside boards. I'm changing the speed of the outside boards. So I need to balance all that. So when I got into where I needed to be, and I mean, this is only like, in a 200-yard stretch where I'm doing all this turning. And so then I sweep my baits through there. Then I have to slow the boat down on the outside. The ones that are going faster through the shallow water, I have to slow those down enough so they're going to get bit, but yet not slow down too far where my outside boards are now going to drag on bottom. Because number one thing on Green Bay is you cannot touch bottom, especially on that northern section between the gobies, zebra mussels, and the moss that's in a lot of areas. I mean, as soon as you touch bottom, you just took that bait out of the equation.
So how obviously you generally knew where you were going to start this tournament. You generally knew you were going to get out there and pull some spinners. Is that correct? I mean,
I didn't generally know where I was going to start. I was going to start in a 10-mile area. I mean, what had actually happened is I was going to stop and it was Green Island is one of the islands a little bit closer. Say that was 20 miles away or so. And it was pretty rough that morning. It wasn't terrible, but at the same time, like as young as I am, I do not like rough water for boat rides. I love it for fishing because I feel like I have an advantage when it's really rough. But I was actually going to stop a little bit short just because I wanted the day to settle out a little bit. I knew they weren't going to bite very good in the morning with that front and that north current. It was going to take them a little bit to set up. But when I got to that stretch or that area, I seen how many boats were still running there and how many boats were already there. And I'm like, you know what? I think I'm just going to make a big run right away. I think a lot of guys are going to, kind of, get a little scared and stop short like I almost did. And so I'm like, I'm just going to take this time now while it's cold and it's, they're probably not going to be biting very good, and just make the extra long run instead of doing it when it got nicer in the afternoon. And so I made, another 20 miles or so. I got up there and there was no one there. And that's kind of what I expected. There was going to be less boats. I'd have things myself. I got up there and, just started, I guess taking a fine tooth comb and just, trying to get some ideas what the current was doing, the water temperatures, and really just taking short little passes and even idling around at times or graphing around on plane to see if I could mark anything and if I could figure out any warm temperatures. And honestly, like it happened so fast, and within a matter of an hour and a half, I pretty much had them figured out. And but I pretty much started on an area that I knew had a massive school of fish sitting on it about a week earlier. And it's just a matter of when things get right, they go nuts. They live there. A lot of them do. There's huge boulders. There's a lot of current. And so everything plays into their advantage when they live there. But what I did know is there was a lot of small fish there too. There was a lot of 21 to 24 inchers. But at the same time, when you got those 25s and 26s, which I was really shooting for, those fish weighed super heavy. They were 6.5 to 7.5 pounds. And I was weighing pretty much all my fish all week long in practice just to get an idea of where these heavy fish were. Because when I started weighing a few of those 25s and 26, I knew that if I could catch those fish, which are easier to catch, I could get 35 pounds pretty easy with catching 26 inchers. And a lot of these guys are thinking you have to have those 28s to 30s. And when I would get it 29, it'd only weigh like 7.5 and not even 8 pounds. And so that mid-size of fish was really feeding heavy. They're really fat. And I knew that if I could just count on catching a lot of those, I could pick and choose a 6 3/4 pounder versus a 7.5, or maybe I'd throw back that 6 and I'd keep that 6 3/4. And so that's really what my game plan was going into the tournament.
Well, I think you said you threw back like a 5.8 or somewhere close to somewhere in that zone. You threw back some sizable fish, right? I mean, did you know you had, so if you're weighing them all, did you know how big your bag was that first day?
Yeah, I did for sure. And that's why I weigh them too, because I can start making decisions like that. Sounds crazy. I threw back a 6-pounder. But when you catch a 9.5 pounder before that, you can make some, I guess, stupid decisions at some time. And so actually my first bite I missed when I kind of started to hone in on this warmer water. My first bite I missed. It wasn't much of a bite, but it was a clue. And that's what I was looking for. I kept telling my coingler, I said, it's not going to be good this morning. I'm just looking for a bite, because a bite now is going to tell me a lot. It's going to tell me that I'm in the right area, the water temperatures. And obviously if I'm fishing there, it's more than likely because the water temperatures are getting better. And it's going to tell us a lot for this afternoon. And I knew the afternoon when the sun peaked out, the waters would start rebounding a little bit on temperature, that those fish would get active. And the second run through there, I went even shallower. I missed one 3 times on a crawler harness. I kept feeding it back and ended up being like a 21 incher. I obviously threw that one back, but it was a thing where I knew that if that fish is going to bite 3 times, or if maybe it's got competition and it was multiple fish biting, that things were going to happen. And it wasn't, I believe I went through there the next time. These are all really short passes. Went through there again, and it was maybe a 6.5, 7-pounder or something like that. Then I believe I did put a 5.5 in, just because I knew it was, the conditions weren't as ideal. I pretty much knew when I got up there that 30 to 35 pounds was going to be good instead of my, original 35-pound plan. I knew 2 days of over 30 would be all right. And then I got that 9.5-pounder for my third fish. And so I knew right away then that, if I'm going to get a couple big bites right now, I got a lot of time. I had till like 4:15 that day was when I had to be back. And I believe my next fish was like a 5.8 or almost 6-pounder, and I did throw it back. And just because I had, a big bite, and I believe my fourth fish was another, I think it was 8 3/4. It was a 29 some inch fish. And so you can start to do some things when you know exactly what you have. And a lot of guys might have just tossed those 29s in the box because they're happy with them. I was happy with it, but still wanted to know exactly what it was, because they were the fat ones. Those fat, 29, 30-inch fish. Obviously a 9.5 pounder, I mean, is a healthy one. And so I knew right away then, like, I had a shot at having a big bag, and I was going to go for it. And I told myself from the start, before the rules meeting, that I was shooting for 35. But when I seen that daylight, there was an option for a 40-pound bag. Like, I was going for it, because there's no given, especially when you have those conditions we had with that north wind and things changing so fast. Like, I wanted the biggest lead I could, and obviously that's what I shot for.
So tell me how you get out there, and I bring this up because you said you were trolling north to south. Are you going with the current, or are you going against the current? And how does current direction play up on the Great Lakes? I mean, are fish positioning themselves much like they would in a river, and they're facing the current and ambushing as things go by, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's exactly what I believe. I always try to go with the current. For one, I can go faster. I'm covering more water. The last thing I want to do is, travel at 0.6 to 0.8 because I'm going into a crazy current. And that's actually one of the things when I won in 2013 that was probably the biggest key to finding those fish and catching those fish in 2013 is actually the leader was, he was starting a pass one way to the north. He was trolling into, at that time, it was some of the craziest current I'd seen. It was over a mile an hour. I had my bow mount on 8 and I couldn't go 0.7. I mean, so I had my bow mount almost wide open. I couldn't even get over a mile an hour. And so it actually picked up my lines, and in that tournament, it was probably like 11 o'clock. And it's because I read that current. Obviously, I wasn't going to deal with that. My crawler harnesses are going to be blown to the top. I won't be able to keep them down. I actually reeled up, took a pass, or turned around, and basically to come down with the current again. And I did that. Obviously, I can go faster. I can keep my baits off the bottom a little, or keep my baits closer to the bottom easier. And I started getting bites that way. But the same, yeah.
I mean, it's a little different than my understanding. Like, if we're in a river, I'm trolling up current for the most part. At least that's how I have always, and I'm nowhere near the competitor you are. But that was how I was taught. Is that wrong?
In a river, it's a little bit different, I believe, because those fish can't see a lot in a river. You're dealing with darker water. And so what I envision on the Great Lakes, when these fish can see 10 feet or maybe it's 6, 8, whatever, they're facing into the current. And so they're already facing the way my baits are coming. So if they're looking this way and my baits are coming this way, they're already ready for the food to be coming down the conveyor belt that way, a school of bait or alewives getting pushed in. And so if they're looking that way, they can see it coming earlier, then they have it come over their head, and then they see it and they come up and follow it. And so how I envision those bait or fish down there, same with smallmouth. I drop camera down quite often to figure out what's the difference between the two, because it's amazing how many fish are really down there when you don't mark anything. And they're all generally just swimming into the current. I mean, they have to. If they're not swimming into the current, they're going to be swept away in a matter of 5 minutes. And so it's one of those things where they're already facing that way. It makes everything easier for me for bowl control and for speed wise. So I always go with the current any chance I get.
So how do you determine like blade shape? Is the vibration that is much less of a factor? Are you going more for more flash? I mean, the bait fish, the alewives in the Great Lakes, I mean, they're white, they're bright, they're reflective. I mean, are you going more like that, or is it more about noise and vibration and trying to get them to hone in on you?
It's a lot about I guess resistance of a blade. Like, I don't necessarily, because there's willows that spin really wide, then there's willows that spin really tight. They're the same size. It's just the shape and the cup of that blade. Same with the Colorado. The deeper cup ones start to spin wider, but at the same time, you can have a flat Colorado that spins really wide, and the wider that thing spins, the more resistance. So it's already bringing it up. So a lot of times I'll actually use those blades in my advantage. Those really ones that pull really hard. A lot of times I'll run those over the shallowest part of the structure just because they're not going to fall down as fast. And a lot of times those tighter willows and things like that that have less resistance are going to sink better. So a lot of times I'll play those on my outside. But a lot of times that I'm really using it for color. And these fish out there can be super particular a lot of days. Action can mean a lot when the water's dirty. Like I said, Colorado's definitely throw more vibration and thump down there when the water is darker. But I use a lot of willows when it's cleaner because it's more natural. They spin tighter. They don't look as gaudy. And then it's all about just trying to look natural. Not as much as just being bright and shiny because of the alewives. A lot of these fish will eat a goby if it swims by. And so I run a lot of, just dark colors and things like that. I'd say in this tournament, though, day 2, you'll see on camera, I'm sure, it was crazy about purple. I mean, I've actually probably never seen a day where literally every fish came on purple, where I couldn't even get bid on anything else, because the day before that, it was not the case.
I think that's interesting, because you're bringing up the color aspect, and you don't talk about color a lot, but when you look at the hierarchy of how a fish, or at least what we believe on how a fish reacts to things, color falls way down the priority list. I mean, the action, the size, the vibration, all those things seem to be more of a trigger, and you're thinking it's the color, because you brought that up. When you get somewhere new, go with the masses and figure out what the local color preference is.
Yeah, so there's a couple things to that. I think the number one thing about a crawler harness is there's not a lot of trigger to it. It's just one of those things that's slow and just kind of, takes its sweet time going by. The only trigger that I can use is my speed. I can either change it and speed it up real quick to bring it up over something. Obviously, that's a trigger. And same time, when I drop it down, letting that bait fall back down, the rock hump or the point, whatever, obviously that changes speed and that flutter is a trigger. Other than that, I basically spell out a crawler harness as, if I set a cupcake in front of you and me right now, that thing is only going to sit there long enough where eventually we're going to take a bite out of it or whatever, And that's the same with the crawler harness. You're putting it by them slow enough that basically they eventually get intrigued by it and they start following it. So the number one thing about a walleye is they can't see that well. Their eyes are built for nighttime. They have large cone cells. And I've used the underwater camera a lot, those water wolf cameras on your line. They'll miss a bait more times than they'll actually get it in their mouth. And that's because they can't see well close. But what they can see is colors from a great distance. And that's what a lot of times catches their eye. So you have this slow moving bait. You get some kind of color that they like or they follow that day. I mean, anyone that knows anything about walleyes and crankbaits, they can be super particular on color. And it's the same thing with the crawler harness. You start to get them following it. They'll actually swim alongside the crawler harness sometimes, and they'll back up and they'll get right behind it. And I'm sure that's when they smell the crawler and they can see the action of that crawler so fluid. And then they actually come up and race behind it and hit it. But a lot of times they'll even just, I have them on underwater footage where the crawler is literally just hitting them in the nose, and they're just swimming behind it for like 15 seconds. And a lot of times they might just keep nipping at it and eventually swim away. And that's where I think it's super important to have a good hook on the back or even on the front, because when you do get a bite on a crawler harness, you want it to stick to anything possible. Because you have to think about it. You're going slow. You have this line behind your planer board, and you have a bow on your line basically to your planer board to where your line goes back. So you need to basically make up all that difference to get your line to come tight. And I use a super stretchy line for my crawler harnesses. My main line's 14-pound Trilene XL. All the dive charts are based off the 10-pound XT, but it has the same line diameter as that does. But it's stretchy, and what that allows for is when it's windy and it's rough, obviously that stretch is cushioning my presentation. It's not jerking the board forward, and it's not jerking my inline weight or whatever I'm using, my crawler harness or a crankbait. And so it stabilizes my presentation a lot, because it's crazy to see, once again, in that underwater stuff that I've tested, how much your bait really is affected by waves, even with all that stretch like I talked about. And so when it comes time for that fish to bite, there's a lot of time that goes by from when that fish bites it. And if it just hangs onto it before you're ever going to see anything on that board to maybe tip back, or even, the tattle flag to go down, and then you have that bow in your line you need to make up. And so I want a hook that is going to just stick on anything it comes in contact with. And that's why those fusion hooks, ever since about a year before they launched, I started using them on crawler harnesses when I had like a limited supply, and it was unbelievable on how deep that those hooks would hook compared to a regular hook.
So are you, is there anything special that you're utilizing with your sinker, with your inline weight? I mean, is it the fish shaped weight? Is it a bead? Does it matter?
So it's an offshore tackle guppy weight, and I wish I had one here, but it has the pull point is actually on top, and then I use the back of it. I actually put a chain swivel on there, but
Yeah.
what it does is it creates a little 90 right here in front of, almost, it's not a fish weight, it's more round.
Right.
But with that pocket right there, it's going to catch anything that's floating weeds. Spiny water fleas are huge, and especially in Green Bay, they catch on your line and they slide down. So what I don't want to have is a streamline weight where it can get to my crawler harness. So that guppy weight with that basically 90-degree pull point in there catches all the debris right in the front of the nose.
Well, it's more of a debris deflection than than actually determining anything to do with the action.
Yep. And so what I don't like
blow before the tournament, which added a lot of debris, right?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of floating weeds too. But those spiny water fleas were terrible early in practice. But what I don't like to have is a fish weight. I see you guys run fish weight, but the last thing I want to have is anything in front of my crawler harness that looks like anything they want to eat. I want them focused in the back, not in the front. And one thing about fish weights is they're always really thin too, and they have less drag. And what less drag is going to do is allow that thing to plummet to bottom even faster, giving me a harder time to have control. So that's why I like those round guppy weights from offshore tackle, because it's kind of a balance of everything.
Do you hook your crawler any way different? I mean, obviously you're talking about crawler, so fake, real versus, and how do you hook them?
It's no, I guess no different than anyone else. I'm using a real crawler. I hook it in the octopus hook in the nose, and I hook the treble hook right behind the crawler. I do pinch off the crawlers depending on size. I don't want a 14-inch crawler when I only got hooks in the front 5 inches or so. And so I pinch off back the crawler depending on the size. Some of them you don't have to, but I don't want a massive crawler where they have 0 hooks in the back where they may miss it, or I may get a really bad hookup because there's nothing back there.
Do you care if are you trying to incite any kind of a spin or twirl to it at all, or do you just want it to be straightforward?
I want it to be straight. I don't want to curl in it because I put my treble hook back too far. I want it to hang straight so it's nice and fluid through the water. Like I said, when there's waves down there, it's unreal on how much that crawler is actually undulating down there. The tail is wiggling. Actually, working on a project pretty soon here on trying to make something that we can duplicate that really easy.
So tell me a little bit more. One of the things that fascinates me about the Great Lakes is the whole current aspect. And you've talked about current. A lot of the guys are talking about current, but most of us, I don't know. At least especially those of us come from like northern natural lakes like myself. I mean, other than if I'm not on a river, I generally don't have to deal with too much current. And So, one, how do you? I mean, are you using like the NOAA current maps when you get somewhere that help you kind of lay down the initial groundwork, and then tell me about how you figure that out once you get out there?
Getting back to the current, there's current in every lake. Even like my home lake here is about 3 miles by 2 miles. It's a bowl shape. And all the bass, I have some key weed lines that are current orientated. And so there's current in every lake, especially when you get islands that funnel things down. As for current on the Great Lakes, I do use some of that NOAA maps. But at the same time, they're super inaccurate. It gives you maybe an idea on which direction the majority of the flow is going. But once you throw structure and islands around, there's all these eddies. And that's where I can learn from reading the water from salmon fishing. Before this tournament, I spent literally a week and a half salmon fishing on the other side. I didn't walleye fish at all. I think I maybe walleye fished maybe a handful, maybe no more than a week this year. I walleye fished before this event. And one of the days was with Hoyer on Green Bay in the spring, and maybe a local derby back home. Otherwise, I've either been bass fishing smallmouth up in Sturgeon Bay, or salmon fishing on the other side, or bass fishing back home. And you can really learn a lot from salmon fishing and currents, because currents are everything with salmon. It really sets them up, but you can start to understand the current slicks that are out there. There's current slicks on Green Bay, just like the Big Lake has. And those slicks are different currents basically merging together and water temperature change. And obviously that's where the steelhead and a lot of your salmon orientate along those current slicks and those temperature breaks. And so basically spending a week and a half out there. I love salmon fishing. I have all this stuff to do myself, but you really can understand with the thermoclines how to read those on your graphs, maybe adjust your settings a little bit to see them better, but you also makes you look for things on the water. And it was the same thing when I got there on day one. I mean, I could see the current slicks coming off of this piece of structure, very easily. I could see where the water was blown up right outside where it was really slick. Even though there was waves, it was slick right there. And that's telling me that the current is pushing straight up, and that's going to be your cold water. And so it's one of those things where it doesn't matter, what you're fishing. You learn so much on the Great Lakes, fishing multiple species. I think we kind of talked about this earlier. Once I figured out and started fishing more and more bass, I learned more and more about a walleye and every other fish and how they relate to things. And that's one thing neat about the Great Lakes is there's such diversity, but everything is big. I mean, the structure is big, the fish are big, and but it's also you have a lot of clear water, and you can learn so much from clear water because you can see what's going on. You can associate with what you're seeing on your electronics versus what you're looking at over the side of the boat. And it really puts the whole big picture together. So when you go to a place like the Mississippi River or Devil's Lake, you can kind of understand what you're seeing on your graph and maybe what you're looking for, what it may look like down there and what those fish are doing.
So a current, though, when it's like on the Great Lakes, it's not the entire water column, or is it? Right? I mean, it's not from surface to the bottom. It's got to be. I mean, are there different
layers?
Yeah, there's got to be different layers. How does that set up? Because I'm going to guess that there's different layers. To me, would mean there's potentially different temperatures running in there at the same time. Are you always looking for colder, some sort of thermal?
The biggest misconception about walleyes is that they're a cold water fish, because a lot of people think, well, they go deeper in the summer and they want that cold water. But walleyes are not a cold water fish. That's why in Lake Winnebago or wherever, even on Green Bay, I mean, those fish live shallow. I mean, I was catching fish out of 5 feet of water. And it doesn't matter if it was when Woodkey won a few years back, we were still fishing 10 feet or less. Walleyes are a warm water fish. Northern pike are a cold water fish. They want to be below the thermocline, but you rarely see walleyes below there. They like the warm water. And so I'm always looking for that, those warm currents. And so that's generally going to be your warmest water towards the top. And it's a lot of times, it's hard to say, but one dead giveaway on Green Bay is the water color. That'll tell you a lot. But a lot of times that water color may be only in the top 5 feet or so. So it can be deceiving. And it's one of those things where, there's a couple of things that you can utilize, but to me, I've spent so much time on the water studying this. This is kind of how I figured out how to, be so successful on Green Bay, is that water temperature stuff. And so I can use my electronics and figure out a lot of that. But like you said, there's multiple layers. On day one of the tournament, I mentioned there was 4 thermoclines if I was in 40 feet of water. And so there's a lot of mixing going on, but the only ones I'm worried about are the ones that are on top.
So I think it was a Gary Parsons interview somewhere post-event that he talked about wherever he went from. Maybe it was after day one. I'm trying to remember exactly, but he said I got out there and the current had switched 180 degrees, and that the fish don't just move around to the other side. It's structure related. The fish move to the other side, or do they just pull out altogether?
So there's a few things that can happen. For one, you got to think about if they had current going one direction, that's the day, if they were set up there, if wherever Gary was, he caught them the day before, those fish fed really heavy, more than likely that day, because things are right. It made it easy for them. A lot of times those fish may slide around and feed again on the other side, but more times than not, I think it's a different school of fish. Those fish that took the day off because the current wasn't right for where they were, now the current's right there. Now those fish are going to feed. But the simple thing that what we had happen is we had these big strong winds out of the north, southeast, and north, which is coming off that shore on the other side, both ways. Eventually we had a flat, calm day on day 2, which all that water started to come back. It all gets pushed one way and it's eventually got to come back. And that's what started happening on day 2. But my current was actually the same until about 11 o'clock. And at about 11 o'clock, it started to switch out of the south again, pretty light, but right away in the morning, it was still north.
So when you get to, I mean, when you're setting up for a tournament, Great Lakes, help me understand, are you always triggering, or are you always targeting structure, or are you targeting bait fish? So let's say, we're going to end the season at Erie. And Erie's got open water, and Erie's got areas of structure. And we often hear guys, trying to chase a nomadic school of walleye. Are you going to chase those nomadic walleyes, or are we going to just go find someplace to hang out and try to get the fish that are relating to that?
Erie is a different one. Those fish are definitely a different breed of fish out there. The fish you're generally after are those nomadic ones, just because those are a lot of times your bigger ones. They're after the big schools of bait fish out there. But in any other place other than Erie, I want structure fish. The reason for that is I know that they're going to stay put. The conditions might not be the same where they're going to bite, but I know when it is right that they're going to be there. And same with Green Bay. You don't see me too often go chasing that mud bite. I actually pray for weather and storms so that way those fish I don't even have to worry about them down there. I may have a tougher time up north too, but I know that, I can fish those structure fish where if I do it right and find the right temperatures, I can catch them. And so I always like to have fish that are anchored up somewhere where I can almost predict where they're going to come from, instead of trying to figure out if they're 5 feet down over 30 feet of water, or if they're going to bite today, or if it's at noon or whatever. I want predictable fish and fish I can instantly go grab. It doesn't matter if it's a tournament or if I have some media event they do. I want fish that I know that if I pull in somewhere and they should be here and this should be right, in about a matter of 15 minutes, I'm going to know, instead of spending a full day in a mud flat trying to figure them out.
So one of the most common questions that I've had on social media, knowing that I was going to be speaking with you, is how do you know when, and I've had this a lot about Green Bay in general, but how do you know when to cast and when to troll? How do you make that decision?
So that's the tough one, right? Because everyone thinks that you got to cast. And for me, it's easy. I mean, number one, the middle of summer, you start to get algae stain and the water gets darker. When the water is clear in the spring, that casting program is a huge trigger. And a lot of times in the spring, they're super balled up and congregated. So those fish are, in small areas. So casting is super efficient. Come summertime, things start changing. Those fish start spreading out. And the most important thing they do is they start suspending. And I don't care, what you're casting. When there's fish suspended, they're a lot harder to catch than the ones on the bottom. And so if I can use my crawler harnesses and target those fish too, and at the same time I'm covering water, this particular event, the fish were spread out a lot, other than, this little eddy that I had found, whatever was holding a bunch of them. But pretty much all week, these fish were, kind of spread out. It wasn't like they're on the high spots. A lot of times they're off the edges of all the structure. It seemed like where they're hanging out, it wasn't quite set up for summer yet. And but at the same time, I can catch them 3 at a time. I can catch them 2 at a time. And like with talking about with that stretch in my line with my trolling, it's a huge rubber band, so I don't lose fish either. And that's the number one thing when I'm fishing, especially northern Green Bay, when I'm going for 5 to maybe 8 bites. I can't afford to lose half of them. And a lot of these baits that you're casting in the summertime, these glide baits, they have a 1 ounce weight. That they can shake their head and they can fling that thing around. And with a crawler harness, they have no weight with beads and a hook. The weight's so far up there, they can't leverage that bait to shake it off, unlike, lipless baits and glide baits for that matter. And so I can catch them more than 1 at a time. I started off day 2 with a triple that was 8.5, 7.5, 6.5 pounders. And I can get them to the boat, and that's number 1 rule. I don't know how many guys you probably heard go across the stage talk about how many fish they lost, or they lost this fish or that fish. I don't talk about any of that in the summer, and it's one of those things where there are spots that are made for casting, but a specific area where maybe it's a couple big boulders on a whole piece of structure. That's gonna be a casting spot. But at the same time, the summer they start really spreading out, and they may suspend depending on conditions. I mean, those are trolling fish. They always have been and they always will be.
You got any, if anybody's going to come out to Green Bay for the first time, the one last question I am getting from social media is tips for the first timer to Green Bay. And you had said something about obviously get to, there's nothing wrong with going to a communal area to learn how those fish bite there. So stop at a bait shop would be one key, and just, well, seriously, and talk to whatever port you're out of and find
How we tackle.
Kick out some fish. Anything else you got for somebody?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the main thing is don't be afraid to fish too high, especially in the summer on Green Bay. If you're fishing 25, 30 feet of water, I'd say majority of your fish are going to come in the top 15. And so there's a couple things that play into that. Obviously, I get talked about it this whole time. Warm water's up there. And two, you have water clarity to play with. I mean, those fish they don't have a problem traveling 10 or 15 feet if they have the clarity to see those baits up there. So a lot of times keeping your baits high in the water column are going to get you a lot of times more bites than, keeping them below a lot of times all the fish. But a lot of times, this time of year, it's kind of focusing on where that water is consistent. And I'd say from Oconto to Sturgeon Bay, that area in the middle of the bay right now, we're in the middle of July, toward the end of July here. That's where the fish, the masses of fish right now are. And because that water temperature is the most stable there. As you go north, like I talked about how I won the tournament, it's dictated by wind, and you can lose that water temperature really fast, and it may take a week to come back. And so to me, I like crawler harnesses just because I can basically force feed those fish. What it comes down to where you're fishing to. If it's just mud flats and it's maybe off the edge of a piece of structure, crankbaits can be a great option. And I'll be honest, I literally had so many crankbaits in my boat starting practice because I told myself I need to fish crankbaits more. I don't do it enough. I have enough, passes where it's flat and it's easy. I can pull crankbaits because crankbaits will catch big fish. And I've been beat enough times by guys like Joe Okada. He's a classic example. He loves running crankbaits. And he does well, and especially on big fish. And so it was one of the things that going into this tournament, I told one of my co-anglers, and he gave me some static for it because I never put a crankbait in the water the whole practice. But it was one of those things where I kept telling myself I wanted to because they catch big fish. They might not catch numbers, but they will catch big ones. But anyone going to Green Bay, I'd say, stop at either Howie's if you're on the Sturgeon Bay side, especially the guys there are great guys pointing in the right direction. Larson's is a good area. And if it's on the West Shore, Oconto Shore right now is going to be heating up and was getting better.
No, that's all great advice. So we're looking forward to the next stop here, Sault Ste. Marie. Any prelim thoughts on that, or have we even turned our thoughts there? We got a little bit of time between events here.
We don't have much time. I have about a week off here, and I'll be heading up there next week. We're just going to do a little bit of vacation this week, and I have my camper in Egg Harbor again. I pretty much have been living up there since before the 4th of July. And so I'll be up there fishing a little bit, but Sault Ste. Marie sets up very similar to Green Bay, only has more current. Now you basically have a river system with a bunch of structure and islands in the middle of it. And it's going to play a little bit different without being able to fish Canada this year. But at the same time, I'm fine with it. I mean, we have plenty of water. We don't need to have Canada on board. Last year was almost overwhelming. Didn't seem like he covered anything in practice. And I'm looking forward to it. I had a good finish there last year. Like I said, it reminds me so much of Green Bay, minus maybe a few less big fish. But I'm looking forward to getting back on some big water.
Well, Korey, congratulations once again on a great win at Oconto in the Bay of Green Bay and kicking off the 2020 season exactly like you envisioned all winter long.
Thank you, Chip. I mean, one of these years, I hope the tour doesn't have a Green Bay or Winnebago on there because I can sleep a lot better all winter not knowing I have to worry about messing one of those tournaments up.
Well, I don't know about messing it up. I think, every time we go there, I think, what did we figure out? The worst finish you've had there is 13th. Is that right?
Yeah, it's something like that, yo.
Crazy good. Super. It's wonderful to for you to take this time out and share all your insight on walleye fishing the Great Lakes and walleye fishing in general. So thank you very much for your time, Korey. Congratulations once again. And thanks all of you for joining us on Wildside Live. We'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe with the button below. You can get more videos just like this. Thanks again, Korey.
Thank you.